You guys asked for this, so we're bringing it. With a nod to Monkey Boy 7, we're about to address the heaviest bird ever to take to the skies, Argentavis. In this video, we're talking about where it came from, where it went, and we'll talk about how its bipedal equivalents dominated South America on the ground, while Argentavis itself patrolled the skies. And stick around to find out who its closest relative is today. First, to get to grips with Argentavis, we need to set the scene. The Miocene, to be precise. Flight has evolved at least 4 times independently since the dawn of life. First, the insects did it, and they're still quite good at it too. Then reptiles did it as pterosaurs, likely to escape the growing dominance of the dinosaurs on land. They don't do it anymore. But the dinosaurs themselves would ultimately do it too, perhaps beginning sometime in the Jurassic, and they'd outlast the pterosaurs by a wide margin. These avian dinosaurs survived the Cretaceous extinction event that killed off all the other lineages, and are now what we call birds. And in the absence of pterosaurs, birds would become quite large. The Paleogene period that followed the Cretaceous extinction led to a rapid expansion of a lot of the bird lines that we know of today, including birds like penguins and ostriches, which, with the land now free from penguin and ostrich-eating dinosaurs, exchanged flight for terrestrial and aquatic niches. At the end of this period, the Oligocene epoch saw South America snap off from Australia like an overly dunked biscuit, and begin its long journey off on its own into the ocean. It carried with it a wealth of unusual animals that would become more unusual as they found themselves more isolated from everything else. Among them were a bunch of marsupials and a group of very intimidating terrestrial birds known as terror-birds, and in the air, a group of flying raptors known as teratorns. A loose boundary exists between the Oligocene and the Miocene, and by this time most of the continents were in their present positions already. But South America was still lost and alone, drifting slowly towards North America, but nowhere close to linking up with it just yet. Miocene South America carried its unusual fauna along, becoming more flooded around the edges as sea level rose, and even at one point possibly bifurcating the entire continent with a system of inland seas running through Patagonia. We've been whipping through epochs a bit quickly here to set the stage, but it might be useful to pause a little bit to get some perspective. Remember that the late Miocene began around 9 million years ago, but this was still around 11 million years after the Miocene began, after the end of the Oligocene. So already by this point, those prehistoric South American stowaways were closer to our time than they were to the moment South America broke off from Australia. And by the late Miocene, some things were looking pretty modern as far as animals were concerned. There were monkeys who'd rafted across somehow 20 million years prior, and there's even some evidence that suggests elephants had swum across by this point too. There were no jaguars, tapirs, bears, or dogs, as these would all have to wait for the land bridge to form before walking over, but there were giant sloths and armadillos roaming around. And in the water, one of the largest caimans to ever have lived shared the freshwater with Megapiranha. Still, there were few to no large mammalian predators on the ground, so just like they did 60 million years before, birds ruled. As we mentioned, dinosaurs barely slipped through the end Cretaceous filter, but many of those who did maintain their dinosaur energy, and of all of them ever, it has to be the terror-birds that embody this energy the most. Terror-birds were quite diverse in South America, and it's thought they dominated all the predatory niches until mammals came down from North America much later. They had enormous beaks, and they could grow up to almost 3 meters tall. And they didn't fly, they ran. But this video isn't about them, it's about what was above them, and since there were enormous birds holding the fort on the ground, there was selective pressure for enormous birds to take to the sky. And of all of them, Argentavis was the most enormous. If you look at the periodic table, right above AU for gold, there's AG for silver. That's because the Latin for silver is argentum, which is exactly where Argentina gets its name from. And it happens this is where this dominant avian predator got its name from as well. Argentavis, then, means silver bird. Argentavis was the aerial equivalent of a terror bird. It had a mighty, powerful beak, an imposing size, and it would have brought down selective pressure on almost anything smaller than it was. This was a raptor of enormous proportions, a Teratorn, a member of the now extinct family of raptors known as Teratornithidae, which sits in the same order that most of our diurnal birds of prey still occupy today. 6 genera of Teratorn have been identified so far, spanning time from the Oligocene all the way to the end of the Pleistocene, and all of them were big. And while the largest terror bird, Brontornis, was ending its reign on the ground in Argentina, the largest Teratorn was likely just getting started in the air. Argentavis shows up in the fossil record from sediment dating back between 9 and 7 million years. It was the first of the Teratorns to be discovered in South America, but it wouldn't be the last. Unfortunately, it was one of the only specimens of its genus, give or take some uncertain samples found elsewhere that seemed to have not been truly confirmed. The holotype specimen, then, was given the species name magnificens, and this is a pretty fair description because Argentavis was probably the most massive bird that ever flew. The bones of Argentavis were compared with a better-known genus in 1980, and from those extrapolations it was given the wingspan of 7.5 meters. When it was compared with the California condor, though, this estimate shot up to a maximum of 8.3 meters. Unfortunately, it has gone up and down a bit since, but the most recent 2014 estimates have it sit between around 5 and 6 meters in wingspan. Smaller than the original estimates, but still quite large nonetheless. Regardless, this bird is one of the largest to have ever taken to the air, and while there are some contenders for larger wingspans, and we'll come to those later, what makes Argentavis stand out from all of them is just how massive it was. The wandering albatross is the bird with the longest wingspan around today at around 3.5 meters, and this huge bird weighs around 7 kilos. That's pretty light for how big it is, and the heaviest flying bird, the Kori bustard, is much more dense, at around 2.5 meters across when carrying a whopping 19 kilos in weight. Argentavis had been through several weight estimates, but the current suggestion is that it weighed between 70 and 80 kilograms, and it could really soar. On wings of around 6 meters, this would have occupied a niche similar to those of the largest New World vultures like the condors, only significantly larger. The Andean condor is the largest of these, with a 3.3 meter wingspan and around 15 kilos in mass. So Argentavis would have been an absolute monster, even nudging up against some of the decent-sized pterosaurs before it. So what kept a raptor this big satisfied? Like the modern condors, Argentavis was probably a scavenger, but it may have been capable of hunting as well. Argentavis's weight would have required long and wide wings that were likely not that great for flapping. This monster bird could then have been a montane specialist, catching updrafts from the sides of hills to take off and hang in the air like a dragon over the foothills of what would at the time have likely been actively volcanic mountains. Much of the mountain range in Argentina was active during the Miocene, and the region was drier than it is now, so perhaps Argentavis had a vast expanse of rugged, inhospitable terrain and scanned it for carrion of larger prey that hadn't been able to find water. The keen eyesight and bipedal nature of the terror birds wouldn't have been so much use in the barren wastelands of the foothills, where there was nothing to hide behind to stalk prey, so it could have been that Argentavis used its skills to occupy one of the only niches that they couldn't. It could also be that the presence of the terror birds at lower altitudes kept Argentavis up there, and perhaps its presence in the hills kept them away too. Maybe there would sometimes be scenes of conflict between the two groups, as one found the kill of the other and tried their luck at stealing it. Both of these lines of birds had beaks designed for tearing, which does suggest carrion would have been a large part of their diets, but Argentavis would also have been able to swallow smaller animals whole, say up to the size of a hare. Hares weren't there yet, of course, but caviomorph rodents were, having stowed away from Africa right in the early days, just as rodents do. Capybaras, or their Miocene equivalent, may have been on the menu. And it's easy to picture an aging glyptodont, well aware of its pending fate amid the terror bird forest. taking its last walk out of the woods to die in peace on the dry and desolate foothills of the Andes. Its tired eyes taking in one final image, the silhouette of a monstrous Argentavis, blocking out the sun before closing its eyes forever. The end of the Miocene brought with it the early bumps of island chains that would eventually connect North and South America. This would be the precursor to the greatest biotic interchange event ever known, and South American fauna would no longer be isolated and no longer be safe. It's not clear from the meager fossils what drove Argentavis to extinction, but perhaps it was the influx of all-terrain predators like cats taking all the food, or perhaps it came sooner still. Other teratorns would be found in North America until the end of the Pleistocene, and they would be huge birds too, but nothing yet has come close to the massive Argentavis. And it's still pretty close to the top of the list for largest wingspans, with only one true rival in Pelagornis. This was a toothed albatross-like beast that wasn't just a little bigger, but probably up to 20% bigger than Argentavis. It currently holds the title of the longest wingspan of any bird, but nothing yet has toppled Argentavis from top spot of the heaviest. So now we come to the end of the video, but as promised we wanted to touch on the closest living relatives of Argentavis. But before we do that, as usual, we want to thank you for watching and remind you that liking this video really helps others find the channel, and your subscription can help keep it growing too. Argentavis, along with all the teratorns, is well and truly extinct, but there are some close relatives around today that have taken their role. One of the largest flying birds today is also an Andean mountain specialist, and one that we briefly mentioned already, the Andean condor. As the largest flying bird of prey, it now carries the torch for Argentavis, soaring imposingly against the blue sky above hikers, navigating cold, inert boulders around what was once an active volcanic refuge for Argentavis. It wouldn't just be cats that descended from North America to shake things up. Bears, canids, and perhaps the most brutal of all, mustelids, would make their way down into Argentina's ecosystems eventually. And for the beastliest mustelid known, check out our video on Megalictis ferox next. As for this one, that's all for now. Thanks again for watching.